terms of, we've got quite a nice spread. So it's actually, we've got lighter shadows with their darker shadows, lifting. Let me just, first of all, quick test. Yeah, there's not much data. I was just sort of lifting up the shadows just to see how much data I had in my chest, just underneath the chart, in fact. Just trying to get a bit of a handle, because sometimes, you know, if you're really miles apart with these cameras, it can be worth actually still using the chart the way I'm going to show you, but slightly erring on making it fit more towards one camera than the other. The first thing to do really is just to make sure that both of them adhere to some pretty set kind of standards to do with video. So we're going to be delivering this Rec 709. Rec 709 has a set gamma and gamut that we must adhere to, and the saturated secondary and primary colors on the front of the chart should line up with very specific places. So I'm just going to quickly go in. I did actually cover this in my directing color course, not in the context of matching cameras, but just simply in doing a balance for a camera. So it's slightly different this time. We're going to have to use some additional parts of the chart in order to really help us, but it's essentially the same process. So the first thing I've got to do is I'm going to need to isolate my contrast chips. I'm going to start with the big contrast chips, and then I'm going to kind of go a little bit deeper after that. So let's start off by bringing in, let's just close off that box, and we're hiding that. So we've got the highlight. That will then, in our Luma waveform, that will just allow us to clearly see where those different parts of the chart are falling. If I then grab my lift, gamma, and gain, I'm just going to bring my lift down so that that bottom reference is sitting just above 0. And I'm going to move my gain so that that 90% reflectance chip, that's the white chip along the top, that should be 90% reflectant. So in a Rec 709 deliverable, that should be placed at 90 IRE. We'll have to use a little bit of common sense here, because we have got trees and sun behind me. So they are almost certainly going to be going up well above 100 nits or 100 IRE. So we might need to compress that 90 to try and squeeze that all in a pleasing way. But let's just, for now, just stick it where we think it should go, and we can work with that later. Let's place these bottom two about there. And I think we're probably in a good sort of safe starting point. Contrast-wise, yeah, okay, it's not quite ideal because those blacks are a little lower than I thought they should be. It is a glossy black on the front of this chart, so if you're tilting it and you're getting any kind of reflection, that black can be lighter than it's meant to. So when you put it down to black, actually things are darker than it. So I'm just going to quickly come back in and just actually, for safety, bring that up just ever so slightly. Let's try there. So that's much better. So next thing to do then is to try and match the same process across on the FS7. Let's come in. And let's do exactly the same process. Let's bring those shadows down, highlights up, midtones redistributed further down here. Somewhere around about there. Okay. Let's whack our saturation up now based on the vector scope in the middle. So let's turn our chart back on. Let's isolate the color chips now. And the color chips should line up with these areas on the scopes. Now, we're going to have to push in some saturation to get them further up. That looks a bit better. And I'm going to use my curve. So in DaVinci Resolve, we have this fantastically useful tool, the hue versus hue curve. And that allows me, by simply clicking these presets down here, to orientate my hues around so that they line up correctly. The theory goes that if I do this with both cameras, my cyan gone, there we go. If I do this with both cameras into these locations where they should be, then I should end up with matching cameras. Now, these are quite broad changes. You sometimes need to get a little bit kind of fiddly, and I suspect matching a Canon to a Sony is going to get quite fiddly, but it should be possible. Let's go into our hue versus sat. And let's make sure that these are falling in the box. This might be trickier with the Canon because it's 8-bit. But there was more saturation in that image to begin with anyway, so hopefully it shouldn't require as much pushing. I think we're almost there. Can you see that the green and cyan are particularly thin? They're kind of like a bit spread out. That's a bit of a sign that the codec is just starting, we're actually pushing this codec quite far, and that's because this has been shot log. So 10-bit's great, 422 is great, but when you're shooting log, you know, you've got a long way to go to get back, so you're using the full extent of the signal quality, basically. So it's starting to go a little bit thin, and that could mean some color artifacting, that could mean some kind of noisy shadows potentially. We'll soon find out, but in terms of aesthetic and quality of image, I'm not saying that this is going to end up perfect. We might have to do a little bit of work with it, maybe a little bit of noise reduction potentially. But just in terms of making them look the same, this process is so far exactly what you should be doing. Let's take this off, look at the whole image. So that's our ungraded image. So all I've done is those two adjustments, one based on the luminance chips in the middle, and then one based on the saturated color chips on the side. And you can see, bearing in mind this is essentially a primary correction, this is a first pass, I'm very close to kind of getting in the right ballpark. It looks good, colors look good. I'll tell you what's sort of immediately catching my eye is the back of this iMac, which is grey here. And so everything's kind of already orbiting around a kind of a good starting middle point for white. I now need to do that same process to the Canon. So I've done the contrast on the C200. I now need to look at placing those saturated primary and secondaries into the same zones that I have just done with the FS7. If I load up my vector scope, actually the first thing I notice, I don't want to play preference here, but we're pretty camera agnostic, as you can probably tell with our mixture. But I think you can see immediately on the vector scope, if I just open that up full screen, look how close those colors are already. So I haven't actually done anything yet. Yellow's exactly where it should be, green's on the way, cyan's on the way, blue's on the way, magenta's on the way, red's very close. It is something, I mean, people talk about the color science of Canons, and this is it. This is what you're seeing right now. You're actually seeing, if you like, the fingerprint of the image processing pipeline of Canon, and it is impressive. It is really good. They're not the world's perfect cameras. There's always something wrong with a camera, but when it comes to color science, Canon are just noticeably better than others, certainly in the price range that we're operating at. So this is really good. This means I have minimal work to do. So what I'm going to do is, same thing as before, come into my curves, hue versus hue, and I'm just going to ever so slightly rotate these round, and it really is slight. Remember, this is 8-bit 420, this codec that we're using. We're not shooting RAW. We've been shooting solidly for 3 days. So we're not shooting RAW with the C200. So it's a good job it's already pretty close, because I wouldn't be able to push it too far. It's not as robust as the codec that the Sony, the FS7 is using, but as you can see, it's much closer. So it's kind of, 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, as my mum would say. Let's pull that up there. Green in there, cyan in there, blue in there, magenta in there. You can see it's kind of going thin quicker, but I'm having to do less with it. In fact, overall, it's actually, particularly in those greens and cyans, it's actually stronger than the FS7 because I've had to do less with it. So I'm pretty confident now that that's sort of accurate in terms of spread of color. Let's turn the window off and just see the whole image. Now, what you'll notice is that even though those primaries and secondaries are now the same, you can see that they're falling in the same boxes. If you actually look at the weight of them, so the end points terminate in the right places, or more or less in the right places, but the actual kind of how they're getting from the middle to that point is leaning in various different directions. And also actually the strength of the cyan in the Sony is very difficult for me to actually get right without, it's actually going to start breaking down quite soon. So that's why I've kind of let it ease off a little bit here. But you can see there's a different shift across. There's a definite shift sort of up more towards the magenta on the Sony, and there's a shift in the opposite direction, more kind of towards like a yellowy green on the Canon. And again, if we just kind of look at that full screen, previous clip, next clip, you can clearly see that my skin is much greener on the Canon. And I think most people who've ever shot Canon and Sony have probably seen this, this sort of bias towards green on the Canons, which I think comes back to a developing out of landscape photography. That's what I heard, is that their color science was kind of optimized for landscape, whereas the Sony, the skin tones definitely look a little better, certainly more accurate. I mean, I'm pretty certain I know what my own skin looks like, which is helpful. Normally as a colorist, you're looking at someone you've never met before and you're like, is that what their skin looks like? But I know that that's what my skin looks like. It is me. So I'm pretty confident that my skin tones are looking better in the Sony at the moment, but this isn't a competition. I need them to match. So this is where I'm going to have to do some slightly more subtle work. You'll notice we've got the desaturated primaries there on the far right-hand corner. The desaturated primaries fall, if we come out of here, they fall in an area halfway between the saturated and the desaturated primaries. So exactly in this area where we can see the sort of the weight shifting around over there. Also in terms of contrast, I think the Canon, it's hard to say, and tell you what is very useful sometimes with contrast. Sometimes people can kind of struggle to visualize their contrast, when there's color in the image, and it can sometimes be quite useful just to desaturate everything. A quick sort of flick into a timeline node and just set your saturation to 0, or another way of doing it would be to go into your RGB mixer and just tick on the monochrome button there. That can make it easier to focus on, does the contrast match here? And I think actually it's pretty clear. Let's go to our Luma waveform, that these do match very closely. I would say, if anything, actually, there's a little less contrast in the Canon, particularly in my skin, so in the mids, there's not quite so much separation. You can actually see it in the light grey and the dark grey chips. There's not quite so much separation there. So there's definitely still some work to do here, but there are other parts of the chart that I haven't used yet. So let's have a little look at these 7 chips along here. I'm just going to turn this back on. I'm actually going to add a new node, so I'm only doing this in my... so I'm only having to do this sort of step by step, so I don't have to undo too much. So I'm just going to come in and just grab these 7 chips here. Get the waveform up. So we've got a more precision basically in comparing these. If I come into the Sony, I can do the same. Grab these. And let's just go back and forth and just compare those. Just going to make this full screen. And I can definitely see, that slightly deeper black. So if I come, this is where the curve becomes useful. I'm actually going to cover, I can't actually see my image anymore, but I don't care, I don't need to. It's all about these curves right now. So I'm just going to come into my custom curves, and I'm going to add some control points along here to make it easier for me to spread out. And I'll be able to make more nuanced changes in the spread of contrast so that they can match more closely. If I come up to the custom curves, this little menu here, the row of dots, I can add my default anchors, which will place anchor points along this curve, sort of 20% stop increments up along there. And I can now make more sort of nuanced changes. So if I look at this between the two again, there's definitely, so this I'm going to start in the middle with my mid-grey. So that is actually more or less the same. I would say it drops ever so slightly with the Canon. So it's going to raise that just a tiny amount, not much at all. Okay, that's better. Now let's look at this black one. That's very different. Let's just bring this up. Yeah, this isn't the same glossy black reference. This is why this doesn't look the same. This isn't the same glossy black reference we had before. That's why it's at a completely different value. This isn't true black. This is a very, very dark grey. And because I've got these anchor points, what I've just done down here isn't going to affect what I just did further up. That looks good. That looks good. You know what? It's pretty close. It's just, there's not much in it. I'm actually pretty happy that, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're losing, these bottom two are actually mixing together, which is happening in both of them. This is where you kind of also see the dynamic range capabilities of the different cameras coming into play here. So how much separation are you getting between those bottom blacks? And it's pretty similar between the two. There's a tiny bit more separation in the Canon, but not much. I'm pretty happy that those are pretty close, and there's some minor tweaks there to the contrast. Let's just close this down. Let's just take away that there. So those 7 are working quite well. I reckon that's basically where they need to be. So the next thing then to do is to come back into, let's do the Sony first. Let's isolate again. And you'll probably think, God, this is a lot of work, Ollie. Well, we're shooting for 3 days with the same 3 cameras in the same 3 positions, and we're white balancing them periodically. So once I get this right once, even if it takes me 20 minutes, I can then apply that to every shot throughout the day, or throughout all 3 days, and get me almost identical on all of them. So it's worth spending that time doing it now. I wouldn't normally do it whilst being recorded, but I think it's important to let you see some of the things that we can do to help match these cameras, because it's often seen as something that's, well, I've heard people say it's impossible, and it's not impossible. It just takes patience, and it takes a known reference value, which is exactly what these X-Rite color checker charts give us. So my desaturated primaries, if I come into my vector scope now, we can see they're falling sort of halfway between the two. We can have another attempt to just get these headed in the right direction. So we can see that red was slightly off. We can see that magenta was slightly off.
We use color charts on the shoots. Probably in motion, I hadn't used them as much as I had in stills, because in stills we used to use them all the time. The software from a company called Cinna, we used to shoot the color chart, you'd overlay, and it would actually build a profile, and it worked really well. My problem up until now is a lot of the color charts in motion, I found there was an auto thing in Resolve that always used to, I tried it a couple of times, never quite worked. Where I have started shooting the charts was especially when you've got a lot of different lighting in there. If you've got HMI mixed with a little bit of LED with a bit of this and a bit of that, it's quite hard to, they've all got a slight color cast. HMIs tend to vary all over the place. I don't, everybody says, oh, it's 5,600. I'm sorry, they're everywhere. They're like, an old bulb, new bulb. Everybody wants to get as long as that. So you need it sometimes as a starting point and a reference point to go into the grade. So I am shooting it more and more now. And especially, I'm going to say it like, I've watched what's you've been showing me, and I'm going to start to implement that now, especially across the stuff that we're doing with Scali, because a colour, it's the biggest thing for us is try and colour manage the workflow. And as I say, with the clients, the biggest thing. And if I can, help any way we can to colour manage the shoot and the workflow we're doing and having a good starting point, I certainly will do.
And it also looks to me like the red's slightly strong. And the magenta is very strong. Can you see how much stronger the magenta is than everything else? Let's pull that back. That would explain why the Sony is so magenta-y. The yellow's a bit weak. Let's just spread these out. Let's come back to the Canon now. Let's do the same thing. Oh, this is fun. You just wait till this is finished. Oh, you should be around my house on weekends. What a hoot. We just sit there as a family, drawing boxes around colour checkered charts. All the giggles we have. Okay, one last time then. So in, and let's, that looks good. That looks good. Look at that cyan, really strong on the, really strong and really wrong as well, pointing in the wrong direction. So that desaturated, see there's a distinction between the saturated parts and the desaturated parts. As you're going through that intensity, it's losing strength, you know, there's that distribution of values and of code basically that's getting encoded into the signal it's drifting off. It's not like the whole image just goes in one direction. There's different strengths and weaknesses across the tonal range and across the sort of strengths of saturation across the image, but also specific hues that are weaker, and that's all part of how the image is debayered and how what's the equivalent of the opponent process in the human visual system sort of extrapolates the yellows, the cyans, the magentas, and how they fall around that vector scope. So my cyan was out, my blue is out, my green was a little out, it's come in here. My red and magenta and yellow are good, which explains why my skin tones are kind of all right, but look at that cyan, it's way too strong. And that green was too strong as well, and I think that may well be why, let's just come out. My skin was looking so dodgy. Okay, now, are we finished? No. Are we finished with the scopes? Yes. There's a certain point that you will hit where these scopes and these charts have reached the limit of their usefulness. It's not because they're no good. It's because you've got a chart that's a printed material that's trying to recreate the reflectivity, the tonal accuracy, the hue and saturation of real life objects. You've got skin tone references there. That's great, and these are as good as they get, but they're not real life. Real life is complicated, and you have to remember what I said earlier, which is that eventually you just need to use your gut instinct, look at that reference monitor, and just go with what looks right. We've done the foundation work. It's the same process. It's exactly what I've been talking about the whole time. We've done the sort of the hard work underneath to get the underlying kind of structure in the right place. Now we just need to kind of use a little bit of instinct, use our eyeballs. For example, we talked earlier about color constancy and about simultaneous contrast. In the Canon shot, the green around me is much bigger. It's filling more of the frame. That's going to affect my vision of my skin tones and my perception of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go with my gut instincts. My gut instinct says I need to add more magenta into my skin in the Canon. Maybe a little bit more still. A little bit more saturation into the Canon. I reckon I'm pretty much there. Actually, now I feel like I just need to take a tiny little bit of magenta out of my skin with the Sony. You tell me. Answers on a postcard. Does that look like it matches? There's definitely some stronger blue saturation in my shirt. The Canon looks like it could do with a little bit more blue saturation. I can't resist, I'm sorry. I'm just going to click on my shirt just to place this. I'm just going to add a little bit more saturation into my shirt. There we go. Right, let's just have a quick look at that. That looks closer. So I've just actually, cheated a bit. So I've just gone to the Hue versus Sat and I've actually pushed more blue. You can actually see the blue reference is now quite wrong, but it's wrong by the scopes and it's wrong by, when you're looking at these reflected chips. When I actually look at it holistically across the image and look at my shirt, look at real life objects and how they appear to my eye with a calibrated reference monitor, I actually think those are really close, really, really close. I reckon I maybe just need to take a tiny bit of kind of greeny, like a limey green, So let's just push slightly more towards like a purple in the highlights of the Canon. I don't know. I'm going to get a straw poll. Kieran, what do you think?
I will come and look.
Come and have a look. Come on. I think we should get a little kind of straw poll. So this is your FS7. This is my Canon C200. I think actually as I'm looking at it now, I think I need a little bit more rich contrast here. Just going to bring the gamma just down ever so slightly. A little bit more. I mean, it's one of those things you need to look at a lot. I reckon actually there's a little bit of purple in the shadows. Let's just take that out a little bit in the Canon. Come on.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty close.
Looks a bit
Julian?
in the blacks on that one.
What I see,
Yeah.
I think everyone sees something different. It's also partly because the cameras are off a slightly different angle, so we're seeing different bits of foliage. But I don't know if the green feels like it's so minor, if it feels a little more golden in the FS7.
That's a really good point. Let's add a new node. Let's get the vector scope up. Let's make a circle. This will answer that question. Let's stick it on that kind of bright green there. Let's come in here, new node, same thing. Yeah, so there, that's the same one, isn't it? Oh, oh no, hang on. Who am I trying to find? Is it that bit? Or is it over here? It's actually, they're pretty similar. Yeah, those yellows, you're right, that yellow there is more green, it's more blue.
Yeah, more blue.
On the Sony. But then it kind of comes around like there. Yeah, you can see the separation. Okay, so what I would do then in that case is I would add a hue versus hue, click on that point, and make that happen. That was minor. So Kieran picked up on a slight difference there, which was that the greens just looked ever so slightly more blue on the Sony. So what I did was I just added a simple, I just clicked on the foliage on the Canon, and I've just done hue versus hue. So I've actually pushed it up. So by pushing it up, I'm moving it clockwise around the hue, so I'm actually moving it round towards red, but by just doing it ever so slightly, I'm moving it more towards yellow, just taking out, therefore, some of the blue. I mean, it's pretty damn close. Well, let's just go back. I tell you what, you can kind of get fatigued from constantly looking at the same image. Let's just go back to the RAWs. So that was before, and this is after. I think any subtle change in lighting, it definitely looks to me like the Sony's got picking up a little bit more light on my face, but I think that's because we've got different lenses, we're on a different focal length on the C200, so it's doing, I think, a better job of evening out that difference. So, as you can see, you can use these charts to match completely different cameras. I've really kind of given myself quite a challenge there. This is a new Canon versus an older Sony. I think a lot of people would understand that there are big differences between the color science of these two cameras. And okay, you can keep working on this. I think I have probably spent as long as I would be prepared to spend on any corporate shoot working on this. If this was a feature, if I'd spent, tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds, then I would spend however long it took until these were exactly the same, and I would really break down the different parts of the image. I'd start to use keys, I'd start to use the hue versus hue and hue versus sat far more, and I guarantee you I would get it to the point where you would not be able to tell the difference between the two of them. It's pretty much there already. It's so close. And these are supposedly two cameras that are impossible to match. I've definitely heard that said to me before. How do you ever match Canon and Sony? They're impossible to match. So X-Rite Color Checker Video is a perfect chart to use. There are other charts available as well, but that's one of the ones that I use. It's got all the reference chips that you need on it to broadly align two cameras, and in this case, an FS7 with a C200. it gets you ballpark, and then I think you can just do a little bit of refinement. But remember that gut, remember that your calibrated reference monitor is going to play a part in how you perceive it as well. And I'm happy with how close I've got it right now, under pressure, working in front of you, hopefully millions of people that are watching this. But continuity is about consistency, and consistency with a chart is a whole different ballgame to consistency where you're just sort of licking your finger and sticking it in the air and hoping that you kind of get somewhere near it. So let's move on now to the fun part, which is pushing in our creative look.